Good afternoon and welcome back. Great.
It's almost time. Our program will begin soon. Please take your seats. As a courtesy to others, please silence your electronic devices. And don't forget to use the Summit hashtag, CFA Summit.
Okay, welcome back from lunch. We still making it? You're okay? No one's having a carb crash or anything? All right. Okay, we're going to be kicking off our civic technology track keynotes. This one's a really big, important topic to me. The thing about technology, I think, that people have been noticing over the last 2 years is that maybe technologists have a responsibility to the rest of society, and that maybe technologists are actually part of that society as well. And we really need to do better, think better, and listen better about the way technologists work, what we produce, and how we work together. I think there's a recognition coming that the world that we're in is a world that we design through our decisions and the consequences that flow from that. So I'm very, very excited to introduce, to speak about building ethical and responsible technology in government, Rumen Chowdhury, Global Head of Responsible AI from Accenture.
Thank you. I hope you had a good lunch. My name is Rumen Chowdhury, and I am the Global Lead for Responsible AI at Accenture. And I'm here to talk a bit about what responsible AI means and what it means for the civic community. So the Responsible AI team at Accenture, just a little bit about us. Our goal is to understand and address social, regulatory, and economic impact of artificial intelligence from development to deployment and beyond. And it's led by myself. I'm a social scientist and a data scientist, and also Deborah Santiago. She's senior leadership in Accenture Legal. So we are, by definition, an interdisciplinary team. We have branches in London, Brussels, Singapore, San Francisco, and Atlanta. So when I first joined Accenture about 2.5 years ago, the responsible AI space was very early, very new. And I spent my first year on my job just talking about what it meant. And I used to start all my talks by saying there are 3 things I don't talk about: HAL, Terminator, and Silicon Valley entrepreneurs saving the world. And I did that because we really needed to focus on the very immediate concerns of algorithms. And since then, thankfully, people have become more aware and knowledgeable about what responsible AI means. And in 2018, my team launched the first fairness tool, which is an industry and enterprise level suite of products that can identify and mitigate harms, biases, et cetera, in your data set and your models. Now, moving forward to 2019, what I found was great. People wanted the technical tools, but then they realized, well, what do we do when we find bias? How do we even make a rubric for what it means for our algorithms to be fair? And what we've moved into is the place of agency and accountability. And you're seeing a lot of legislation being passed, but also even within corporations, they've realized that actually the first stop is about creating good governance. So just to define, what do we mean by responsible AI? And at Accenture, we define it as the practice of designing, building, and deploying artificial intelligence in a manner that empowers people and businesses and fairly impacts customers and society, allowing organizations to engender trust and use AI with confidence. Now, the key word here is trust. We need to make sure that people, citizens, end users, non-technical people, trust the technology. And right now, we're in a space of rapidly eroding trust because some of the common concerns about AI. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but these are the common conversations you'll have with people as we think about adopting artificial intelligence. Will it lead to mass joblessness? Will somebody create an AI that is sentient? What about the lack of transparency, and particularly for government services, because citizens have a right to things like due process? The lack of transparency of AI systems may actually introduce liabilities and problems. Inclusion and diversity of all forms, not just the lack of representation in tech rooms, but also the fact that fewer and fewer companies hold more and more of the power. Artificial stupidity, or as we call it, like the shortcomings of narrow AI. So artificial intelligence, as we know it today, is not a sentient singularity being, but it is a narrow use case based on narrow amounts of data that can do one task hopefully well. And finally, the notion of privacy. Will we erode our notions of data privacy and do things with data that we did not consent to? And then when we think about responsible AI, we think about bias. It's a word that is used quite a bit. So when we think about bias, actually, so I'm a data scientist by background, but as I mentioned, I'm also a social scientist. And what I find is that when non-technical people, non-data scientists, talk to data scientists and they use the word bias, they actually mean two different things. So a data scientist, when we say bias, we think about experimental bias introduced by design or by data. So this can be data bias, is your data set representative of the sample? Measurement bias, did you actually measure the thing appropriately, or was your measurement device broken? Response and reporting, and then design bias. The commonality between these things, they're all measurable. They're a quantifiable amount. So when I can say something like, I have a bias of X%. But when non-data scientists talk about bias, the conversation is about isms, sexism, racism, ageism. We're not talking about measurement bias or some sort of an esoteric numerical value. We're actually talking about harms in society. And it's really important because data is not an objective truth. It is reflective of pre-existing institutional, cultural, and social biases. And these are the harms that can result. And this is a list that's pulled together by the Future Privacy Forum. An immediate loss of opportunity, in other words, housing exclusion, job loss, economic loss, so being offered a different price from someone else because of some factor that should not have factored into the pricing algorithm. Social detriment, which I think there's a lot of conversation about that, filter bubbles that reinforce stereotypes and confirmation biases, social media being very negative and harmful to people. And finally, loss of liberty. So quite literally, the inability to be free in public, whether we worry about surveillance, human rights, or free speech. And the image we have here is about human rights and women being harassed disproportionately on Twitter, such that they feel unsafe in their own homes and in their own real world or analog world existences. But primary harms, in other words, the immediate loss of one of these things, is not the only kind of harm. And as we think about algorithms, there's actually the notion of secondary harms, and these are harder to think about. So algorithmic determinism and the notion of secondary harms are harms that are not an immediate person X did not get something because of some discriminatory outcome, denial of a job, etc. This is more about the fabric of society, the fabric of humanity and civilization, social capital, children's mindsets. So the image I have here is about how schools getting facial recognition tech for free. And actually a school in the city of New York is introducing facial recognition to presumably identify school shooters. Now, since schools have started to do active shooter drills, there have now studies have been released that show that it's actually detrimentally impacted. It's causing trauma to children to do an active shooter drill because they have to constantly think about and be paranoid about what if someone comes and tries to kill us. And now we're going to introduce facial recognition in schools, presumably that can identify, quote, problematic children. Now, there's a lot of issues with that. And here's where I talk about the notion of algorithmic determinism. So algorithmic determinism really is a measurement bias plus a feedback loop. In other words, when a facial recognition software is identifying a face as being possibly aggressive. That is an imperfect technology, and it is a technology that is based on the notion that there is one way to look normal. And if we respect the diversity of people, when we think of people with disabilities, we think of people of different races, different backgrounds, and even culturally, how we express ourselves non-verbally, we can quickly see how there could be a bias here that leans towards a particular way of being. Now, what happens with algorithmic determinism, it's not just bad that particular people may be disproportionately targeted, but what happens is, as those people are targeted, there is some system by which they're processed or they're pulled aside or something happens to them, and that data gets put back into the system, thus creating a feedback loop. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, what we're seeing is, as I mentioned, an erosion of trust. Now, we're quickly seeing that the imperfect use of these algorithms in a way that harms individuals are making people take a step back and think about the use of these technologies. And here's why. To the average citizen, AI is immediate, impactful, and invisible. It seems like magic. It's something that, once deployed, impacts hundreds of millions of people all around the world. It's impactful in that it can deny you a job, it can deny you housing. And most importantly, it's invisible. You don't know if there's an algorithm being used to determine whether or not you should get a job. And often we don't have the right or the ability to ask about it or to do anything if something goes wrong. So when we think about responsible AI, there are some very specific things that we think about. And one of the terms that's used quite a bit is unintended consequences. In other words, most designers of artificial intelligence systems are well-meaning. They are well-intentioned. They are not malicious actors. They are not trying to hurt or harm people. But of course, intention does not equal impact. So unintended consequences can occur. And in the ethics and AI community, the acronym we sit on is FATE: Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Explainability. Fairness meaning, do we have an expectation of similar outcomes for different subgroups? In other words, are the things that are influencing the outcome the things that should be influencing the outcome? Next is the notion of accountability. So within an organization, who's responsible? What do you do if there's a potentially biased outcome? The notion of transparency. Do we understand how the model works? And finally, explainability. Can we identify why an output was arrived at? In other words, again, going back to the notion of due process and the right to information, in particular government use cases, explainability and transparency are very, very critical. But when we think about responsibility, I'm going to devil's advocate myself right now. The notion of explainability is necessary but insufficient, because explainability is a top-down method of providing reasoning for actions. So it's me as let's say a lawyer writing an end-user license agreement that is then distributed to people who will use a product. So every time you've updated your software on your phone, there's this long document that you never read, that's written in legalese that you don't understand, that completely, by the way, explains to you what your rights to privacy are. But that's not useful to you, is it? You don't read the document, you don't have an understanding of it, and you certainly don't action on it. Instead, we have to strive for understanding. So understanding thinks about how to explain the technology from the perspective of the end user. So we have to provide relevant and, more importantly, actionable outcomes. And then moving on to the second then, transparency similarly, necessary but insufficient. Transparency simply provides insights into the system. It says, this is what we are doing. What it doesn't address is systems of power and the ability to take action. And that's why we need agency. Agency provides individuals the ability to change or alter how they interact with the system. And at Accenture, while we do build technical solutions and technical tools, our take is that technology alone cannot deliver on the full promise of AI. And I'm here today to talk a bit about the notion of governance of AI systems. So what do we mean by governance? And I brought up agency and accountability. So agency, as I mentioned, moves beyond transparency. It allows individuals to raise a flag and say, hey, there's something going on here that's wrong. Agency also has to have a clear chain of command for direction and principles from the top, and then clarity and explanation from further down. This is a notion that I call police patrols versus fire alarms. Often when we think about governance, we think about a top-heavy system of monitoring people in a police patrol fashion. When we think about using artificial intelligence and the scale and scope at which it will be used, it's going to be impossible to do police patrols. Instead, people have to be aware on how to pull a fire alarm. So if you think about it, if there were a fire in this room, we all know what to do. Someone's going to pull the alarm, and then we're all going to go out that door and go outside and wait. Nobody actually put out the fire because we trust that there is a system in place by which the experts will come and take care of the fire. But we were all able to identify what we should do and safely take action. And importantly, we raised the flag. And we need to create that for algorithmic systems. And secondly, accountability. Can we think about potential harms and why they're happening? So is there a disparate impact? Is there a business necessity for the practice, or are there reasonable alternatives rather than the questionable practice at hand? This is drawn from Supreme Court ruling Griggs versus Duke Power Company, which has often been the thinking behind some of the tools and products that have been built, drawing from the legal space. And then finally, can we address and redress harms? So if something will inevitably go wrong, there's no such thing as a perfect system. We need to build in a way of fixing things if they go wrong. And for that, we need a governance ecosystem. So we need government, companies, and consumers working together to create good governance. And everybody has their role to play. I want to talk a bit about everybody has their role to play. So for government, it's to provide a forum for discussion, cultivate a culture of responsibility, a culture of ethics, have transparency and clarity around decision making, and create internal governance processes in alignment with regulation and industry best practices. In other words, what are other parts of the world doing? How are other people tackling these problems? And how can your local government utilize that knowledge to make things available to citizens? And for consumers, of course, the responsibility is to educate and be engaged. Take advantage of the information that's put out there, educate yourself, and then also take advantage of the systems that will be put in place for you to raise your voice and raise your hands. For companies, the goal is to provide transparency into practices and processes, and also, importantly, to implement internal governance mandates. So this same ecosystem needs to exist internally at every single company. And at Accenture, that's actually what we're doing. So we've created a group called Responsible Business. And what Responsible Business does is a multi-stakeholder group that gets together and discusses our perspectives on different artificial intelligence technologies. So what is our viewpoint on recommendation systems being used on children or facial recognition technologies? So what this group does is gets together and debates and discusses what Accenture's principles should be. This then gets handed over to another group, which will be able to evangelize this through the organization. So we have internally at our company, and we suggest every company that's using artificial intelligence systems create the same sort of internal governance mandate. So what does that mean? What does this ecosystem exactly consist of? So in a few weeks, Accenture is going to be launching a publicly available governance guidebook. And what this governance guidebook does is it helps walk you through what you need to do to govern AI systems, and importantly, why. So it has multiple parts. So first, by the way, we recognize that most, if not all, organizations have some sort of a compliance program, right? So when we actually initially did a study of tech leaders and asked, well, do you have a system in place for governing AI? Most of them said yes, because they were thinking about their existing technological systems, their tech compliance systems. But those are actually insufficient, as we're finding out. So while these standards can serve as a basic foundation, we need to expand on that infrastructure. So the first thing to do, as I mentioned, is create a set of guiding principles. So there's high-level guidance to ensure there's consistency. As I mentioned, when we first launched the Fairness tool, people were really keen to adopt it, but quickly realized that in order to have internal consistency over the many, many projects that they were going to build, they actually needed to have some guidance from leadership. And that group should be should consist of, as I mentioned, an interdisciplinary group of individuals. Second is the notion of tone from the top. So to create an ethical culture, leadership needs to understand and actively promote these guiding principles. So it's one thing to make a nice document in a PDF and stick it up on your website, but how do you then evangelize and implement them at the project level? And that's pretty hard. If you say something like, children should not be manipulated by recommendation systems, and that is our guidance, anytime there's a team creating some sort of recommendation system, they're going to have to think about how do we measure and track who is a child and if that child is somehow being manipulated. That is not an easy thing to do. So often there's a lot of focus on guiding principles, but not a lot of focus on the actual delivery and deployment of these guiding principles. And that's what people like myself do at these companies. So tone from the top means not just creating these principles, but evangelizing them and helping create the reporting structure and making sure that leadership adheres to these guiding principles. The next step is training and communication. So you have to educate key internal stakeholders. So at Accenture, not everybody is a technical person. We have plenty of data scientists, about 10,000 data scientists at Accenture, but also we have consultants, strategy folks who are not technical people. They're technically savvy, but they're not data scientists. How can those people understand how to implement these guiding principles? So we have to educate key stakeholders and then evangelize that throughout from a tactical and impactful perspective. So this would be risk assessments, testing mechanisms, etc. Phase 3 is something called red teams and fire alarms. So the fire alarms analogy I mentioned earlier. We have to have a system by which people can raise red flags. They can say there's something wrong here. Red teams is the notion of a group of specialists to identify potential fires, basically try to break the system. So the purpose of this group is to take an AI system and try to induce some sort of bias or induce a negative outcome before you deploy it. So it's a stress test. Phase 4, which I personally am a big fan of, is metrics or positive impact. Now, one of the hardest things to do as responsible AI is to actually make a value proposition for responsible AI. Everybody believes in the social imperative. That's not the problem. But when selling the product, you can say there's an efficiency gain, there's a monetary gain in some way. What do I have to offer in responsible AI? Pretty much what I say is, if you listen to me, things don't blow up. So if I do my job, nothing happens. Kind of hard to show a value proposition. Our suggestion is to create metrics or positive impact. Can we show more people were educated, more people were engaged positively? Can we create metrics around good use of an AI system that has positive impact on individuals and not just rely on things like efficiency gains and money saved? And the 5th phase, and this is very much tied to the notion of fire alarms and red teams, is fostering a culture of constructive dissent. So avoiding monoculture, promoting dissent channels, and incorporating dissent through inclusive design. So what does that mean? That means bringing the impacted communities to the table, even if they're non-technical folks, from the design end. And after deployment, and your organization and outside your organization, do you allow for a culture of whistleblowing or for people to say there's something wrong here? And this would mean protection for whistleblowers. This would mean encouragement for people to speak up. And this would mean strong enforcement of non-retaliation policies. So in conclusion, responsible AI is more than just tech tools. We need to address the consequences on impacted communities. And the civic sector is the glue that will play a key role in empowering these communities. Voices of individual citizens need to be heard in government and beyond government as we think about scaling and deploying all these technologies. We cannot, as business leaders and government leaders, think of all the ways in which there could be an unintended consequence. Engaging the community, engaging businesses, and engaging government via a healthy government ecosystem is the best way to do that. Thank you.
Thanks to Roman. Okay, next up, we have Siddharth Hari, editor of web properties at Mozilla. And Siddharth's going to talk about, well, the title of Siddharth's talk is You Only Code as Well as You Listen. And I hope she makes you feel uncomfortable, because we deserve to feel uncomfortable. This is a very important topic that Siddharth is going to be talking about. Jen talked when we opened the summit about the need for courage. And I hope that we're going to be able to hear from Sudette about the difference between saying nice things about the society that we want to live in and the society that we say we want to live in, the difference between that and actually bringing it about, and how much courage that will take. So join me in welcoming Sudette.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes. And I want to make sure I'm heard as I walk around because I tend to have wandering feet. So, I want to thank you. My name is Sudette Harry. I am editor of web properties for Mozilla. I am also a first-generation Guyanese American from Far Rockaway, New York. That's important because I'm in California, and every time I'm in California, I got to tell them New York is in the building. I am also, by tradition, a historian. So my question is often context, not bias, not data, but have we been? Where are we? Where are we going? It was important to me to do this differently. So you are all slightly unwillingly part of an experiment, which I think when we talk about what we are doing with civic tech, an important distinction to make, because often the people we are dealing with are parts of our experiments. I am going to make a request of you that you are people with me today. Not just coders, not just techies, but people. Think about bringing your full personhood, all of your experiences, and what it means to live a life into this space as I talk about these things. Because I asked the internet to write this speech. I asked people to write this speech. The process of me getting this keynote works a little differently. I was presented with my crew. Are y'all there? Abby, Cordelia, Alejandro. Yes, us! About something called empire.gov. We have a website. If someone could throw up the slide for me. decolonizingcivictech.com. Throw up the slide. And we have issued a statement about what it means to do tech, what it means to be involved with tech historically, and what that has done for us as makers, as users, as people. I don't like talking that much on stage. I I will, it's fun sometimes. But what really concerned me and why I wanted to do this is because this is about makers. You are the people who code, who research, who implement, who are at best in the communities working with people. And when we talk about civic tech, too often we talk about bringing in people when we're done. We can talk about bringing in people when we are user testing or we are investigating. It is extractive rather than generative. It is not participatory. You can take the slide down if people need to see my face still. But that is my one slide. And it is my one slide because I asked the internet to write my speech for me. I paid them. I'm making donations to two organizations, BAJI, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and Sister Song, a women's reproductive justice rights organization. And I put a Survey Monkey on top of my Twitter profile, and I asked 6 questions. And I thought that they were important because I wanted to bring people in before I got my idea, before I told you what I was going to talk about. And I wanted to hear what they said, what they thought was important. Something that I hope we do. You only code as well as you listen. Because if what you make doesn't help people, if what you make doesn't affect them, it is not useful. And what I think has been most damaging is our lack of ability to actively listen, as well as leaning towards the things that can be explained with math, bias, things like that, rather than what is important to me. And I think everyone here in some way as people, maybe not as scientists or whatever, but people, context, how we live our lives. I asked 6 questions, and I'm going to go over them with you and why. These questions were open-ended. They brought up some really amazing answers, and I got dinged myself. The first question I asked was, what technology do you and your community need? What does it or would it do for you? One of the first responses was that someone asked for tools for inclusive conference planning, tools for meeting. People are looking for ways to connect to each other. They're looking for ways that allow them to access being parts of the process, civic entertainment. This person spoke specifically of WizCon. Someone talked about texts and websites for political candidates, who they are, where they came from, and what are their stances. We live in a place where people still want to hear from those communities how to access things. But the one that was most important was they wanted to be heard, really heard, by designers and security teams. It would be start to ensure basic accessibility and safety, meaning consult with the people who get left out, not just consultants on this issue. People expect to be left out by the way we design, by the way we talk about tech, by the content we put up. If we are talking about being inclusive, if we are talking about representing people, we have already made a major failure. They expect to be left out. The second response was, what kind of technology do you feel you and your community get? That was not good. But what struck me the most was how people responded. Sorry, I didn't understand, so I answered this wrong. Crap. We have bad internet. People apologize for not having their needs met because technology is such an integral part of their lives. They willingly say it's crap, but they have to use it. The decisions we make, how technology is being used, is affecting people. It's affecting how they think about themselves. It's affecting how they believe they are allowed to ask questions. We can't just build a better mousetrap. We can't just build a better app. We have to start thinking about the processes and ways that we are affecting people. This was my favorite question because I got dinged. Somebody told me I asked a bad question. I'm staring at this question, trying to parse it because technology and community are such broad terms. Get can go about 100 different ways. I'm not trying to be contrary. So someone is apologizing to me for me not meeting their needs. But this is part of the issue. What do we mean when we use words, and do we mean the same thing as people we are trying to communicate with or serve? But as a broad example, there's very little access to computer literacy and cell service, municipal websites, and are not mobilely optimized, even at the state level. People want to be involved, people want to be included. They do not feel included, and they are apologizing for actually voicing that. This was important to me because when we talk about we're doing research, when we talk about we've got users involved and they are really thinking about the thing and they've given us feedback, what do we mean? Did we talk to someone? Did we ask them how they felt? Did we talk to them and ask them how did it affect their lives? Or did we do an A/B test? Did we ask someone to go from a scale of 1 to 5? Did we ask someone to put up a like or a dislike or an agree? Did we actually investigate how this was affecting their lives, or did we just take what we needed to build the better thing? We can build a better thing, but that doesn't make that thing useful, and it doesn't make it what people need. And people are desperate to get the tech that they need. More importantly, they're desperate to understand what we mean when we say civic tech. My background is journalism history. I was the community lead for the Coral Project, so I helped research the talk tools that is now used on 40 multiple platforms to do comments on news. I remember when we started, everyone was closing comments. We don't need comments. We don't need to know what people think. We know how everything's get. There's a pundit. There's a numbers. We're going to do with 538. That wasn't a good bet. We made comments. People want to be heard. And now more than ever, we are looking for ways to get feedback, to talk to people. And I asked them, what was civic tech? 60% of respondents could not tell me. So as we're talking about the civic tech space, as we're talking about civic innovation, as we're talking about building and making great new things, we're dealing with the understanding that people don't know what it means, and we have to fix that. And when I say we have to fix that, I don't mean that we have to make them understand what we mean. I think that we have to come together and make a cohesive understanding of what that means as members of the community and not just as coders. Question 4 was the most important question to me. And this was the setup. And this is the thing that is most dear to my heart. When we talk about diversity and inclusion and even representation, sometimes we often talk about moving people from room to room, who's in the room, who's out the room, who are we making for, how do I be a voice for? No. We all have skill sets, we all have accesses and privileges and trials and tribulations, but people are people and they are the best judges of their lives. They can tell us what they need. And we have to create and be in conversation with them. When I got this opportunity, I wanted to say, what would you say to a room full of people to help to create tech? Not how can we make you understood, not how or can you be a example on a petri dish, but how would you tell people? Not everyone has a smartphone. Civic and convention tech can't be done as a hobby project. People's civic tech, the stuff that is not shiny and bright, is often seen as a thing we push to the side. People don't even understand what it is because they feel that it's not foregrounded. When we talked about decolonizing civic tech, we were looking at websites. How do you get what you need? How long does it take you to get into a website? Does it support multiple languages? Or is it just a thing people do to say they do it? People asked us to hire anthropologists. As a historian, I have issues with that. As a historian who has experience with critical race theory, I have deep issues with that. But they said access and diversity do not automatically equal equity. People want to have equity. They want to feel safe. They want to have good lives. And we are using buzzwords and talking about bringing people into rooms, and people are talking about, I need better access to my healthcare website. People spoke specifically about, please invest in tech infrastructure. It's not the website. It's not the newest app. I can't get on the web. I don't have a cell phone. What I find most interesting is looking through all of these, almost no one spoke about a brand new toy. They talked about the process. They talked about wanting to be involved, wanting to know, wanting to get access, because people care. The other side of this, I know in civic innovation, and we're in an interesting space. I'm doing a workshop called Decolonizing Tech. You probably have some guesses about where I fall. But there is a lot of burnout. We're tired. We're scared. We're upset. We're under-resourced. We might be the lone voice. We don't know what's going on. We are living human lives, and that affects the decisions we make in tech. But it also means that the people who are using the tech we make are doing the same. It's not just about the tool. The tool is important. It's about us. It is about how we enter a room. When you go and you code and you make a thing, do you look at it as a designer? Do you look at it as a person? We often talk about persona or user-centered design. One of my favorite books, Sarah Wachter Bachter, Design for Real People. Do you also code as a real person? Do you research as a real person? Question 5 was, the tech I use in my life makes me feel like the people who design it understand me. I gave people a scale from 0 to 100. What do you think the average number was? This is participatory. What do you think the average number was? We're doing a little better than you think. A little better. Not a lot, but a little better. 36. There were numbers from 0 to 92. And this goes back to the final question. If you're willing, can you tell me why? You gave the score in question 5. I know enough tech to know it doesn't understand my circumstance, and I mitigate it. In terms of my disability, I'm luckier than most. I've got multiple degrees, so I mostly get by okay. Decisions seem not to care. They're openly hostile to my right to privacy, my right to ownership, and contributing to siloing information and of workplaces and employers that will assist me in making informed choices. People still gave us a 36 with that response. They feel they need it, and something you need they're willing to rate highly. What is most important to me at the end of all of this is the way forward. What is the way forward? Listening is active. It's not painless. It's not immediate. It's a process. If we commit to listening, this is gonna suck. People are angry. People are upset. We are angry. We are under-resourced. The problem is not how do we make people not angry with us. The problem is not how to build a better tool. The problem is not how to design a better tool. Because taking care of people is not a problem. Taking care of people is a thing we should do. The problems are anything that inhibit us from taking care of people. We work as designers and coders and spacers. I say that my biggest influence is my mom. She was a union organizer. And she now does a lot of time making hats. And when I ask about my response, about what my biggest thing I say when I go into any room as a researcher or a tech person is, how are we answering this one question? Does baby have hat? My mother knits hats for the NICU in my neighborhood. My mother is like many other mothers, fathers, non-binary elders who make things for small children because they lack them. When we go to make code, when we go to make apps, when we go to do these things, we are filling a need. We are assessing, we are looking, and we are trying to make something happen that was not happening before for the most vulnerable, for the people in need. It is not often a pretty question. It's not innovative. The innovation is not, you're doing something new. Crochet has been around for centuries. The innovation is that a baby didn't have a hat, now a baby has a hat. That is the innovation. Changing the state of something. And that means having many different conversations than the ones I think we're having now. When we talk about AI and data and coding, we must challenge the very assumptions of where we are. Part of the reason I was so excited to do Decolonizing Civic Tech and put you through this experiment is one of the things that keeps coming up is bias is tech. I keep asking, how is bias different from the context? I'm a black woman in America. Redlining is how they made my neighborhood. I'm a first-generation immigrant. You talk about privacy and security. To get my parents' citizenship, I had to give my report card to the American government. My parents speak English. What is that like for people who do not speak English? Are these our cases? Are these part of the discussion? This isn't a number. This is everyday experiences. Are we quantifying them at all? Are we even thinking about them? When people talk about security and privacy, we also must talk about people who have never had it and people who are just realizing that they now don't have it. And what are we designing? Facial recognition comes up a lot, but if I'm in a place where it's racial profiling, the fact that a facial recognition only recognizes me at 60% doesn't matter if I am 80% more likely to be stopped for existing while black in public. I don't care about the algorithm. I'm already stopped. But I still will have to use websites to get benefits, or get my passport back, or even get on the subway. How are we making tech that people can use under all of these circumstances? One of the things that I like to think about most is, I said listening, because listening is a sense, listening is active. But we cannot approach things from just one way. We are just not one kind of person or two kinds of people. There are multiple things. And I ask for listening as a sense, but also as a sensibility, and asking you to activate more senses and more sensibilities. Are you feeling? Are you hearing? Are you teaching? What is material to you? Are you vibrating? Because listening isn't immediate. You might not hear what that person has to say. You're not hearing me, though. And what you need and what is needed to change is different from person to person. One of my favorite things is, I told you I'm from New York, we have a phraseology called, "You good?" And you can ask it, it is an intonal inflection, and you can ask it in multiple ways. There's a meme that signals so many things. You good? It's fine, don't worry about it. You good? Would you like to fight me? You good? Are you okay? You good? You're good at it. It is 2 words, but it is one of the most versatile pieces of communication, and it is about a connection. And I want us to think for now more about connection. We talk about inside the room, outside the room, who has access, who doesn't have access. I would like to think of us, if we think of ourselves as people for this one time, about being part of a connection. We have skills, we have communities. There are people with other skills in different communities. When your toilet isn't working, you don't want an architect, you want a plumber. So not everybody needs to be an architect. And we need to respect the work that people do. And how do we put things in context over putting things in specific boxes or counts or bias? People come in with their stories and their histories and their problems. We have to listen. We have to listen to that in context. We have to listen to what they need. And we have to think about how that will affect whatever we make. I asked a question about tech. I said that I was going to design my talk from the web. Not a single person asked for a tool. Not a single person asked for a faster thing, a better thing, a shinier thing, a newer thing. The innovation they wanted was, I want to be able to participate in my elections better. I want kids to know how to code. I want to be able to have my mom, my dad, myself use tech. I'm thinking of others. I want to know how to connect to the people who are important to me, either from my municipality, my region, my love of Firefly, better. I want to bring the world I see and the world I interact with materially into the world in a way that makes us better, more cohesive, more connected every day. We can code anything. But to have those conversations, to bring up those emotions, to get people to feel that they are heard, that they are understood, does not require better code. It requires a better process. It requires a better conversation. The things we build may be tools towards that process. They may be data that helps that process. They may be brand new, shiny things that help us make those feelings. But if I'm going to ask you for one thing today, if you are given the choice between making a tool or going off and inventing a shiny code thing and having another conversation, have another conversation. Figure out how to make the conversation better. Figure out how to talk to people. Listen for what they ask for, what they need, but also for what you need. It's hard. People are angry. There are things that we need to do. But what I found most shocking and most important of all, as I tried to do this experiment, and I appreciate you for playing with me, is I asked people to tell me something about how they lived their most intimate lives, their fears, what they thought about technology, what they thought about the world, to someone most of them have never met, they've never seen me, and they answered. People look at what we do and they may not be happy with it, they may be unhappy with it, but they want us to do better. One of the answers to the questions actually said, are you well? Are you healthy? Are you good? Because people can tell, even in our coding, in the tech that we think is so above their heads, that we are people behind it. And they want us to be well. Because when we're well, they're well. And we can tell each other where we are by listening, and only by listening and communicating. So, do me a favor. Do not build another app. Have another conversation. Make another conversation possible. Make access, material, comfort, something possible. Make sure the baby has a hat. Make sure you have one too. We are going to be talking at our session at 2:30 about how we can look at it through a very specific lens of decolonization. But if nothing else today, be a full person. Take that with you into your tech. Take that with you into how you design. Because the people who are receiving it are full people. They deserve that much from us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siddharth. So does everyone understand what we have to do? How we have to solve for what gets in the way of helping people? How it's so important for us to build a bigger tent and to be better at listening and acting on that. Thank you for coming to the close of the Civic Innovation Track keynotes. We're going to hit our 2 o'clock break. We've finished a little bit early, so you get a little bit of your time back. We are going to be having the last of our track keynote sessions in here at 2:30. Yes, at 2:30. And hopefully you will all see us back in either the ELGL GovLove Live podcast or at the town hall that will be happening at 4 o'clock. Thank you very much.